Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight that pierced the gloom of the Harmony Creek schoolhouse. The air smelled of old wood, chalk dust, and the faint, lingering scent of childhood mischief. Eleanor Ainsworth, fresh out of finishing school back east and brimming with idealistic notions of shaping young minds, surveyed her new classroom with a hopeful smile. The room was small and sparsely furnished, but the large windows offered a view of the sprawling valley, a landscape both rugged and beautiful. Eleanor, with her neatly pinned auburn hair, her spectacles perched delicately on her nose, and her prim, sensible dress, felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with a healthy dose of nervousness. She had come to Harmony Creek with a trunk full of books, a head full of knowledge, and a heart full of determination to bring enlightenment to this remote corner of the Arizona territory. The school board, a motley collection of farmers and shopkeepers, had greeted her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They had been without a proper teacher for over a year, relying on sporadic lessons from well-meaning but unqualified locals. Eleanor's credentials had impressed them, but her delicate appearance and refined manners had raised a few eyebrows. "You sure you're strong enough for our boys, Miss Ainsworth?" Jedediah Thorne, the largest and most influential rancher in the valley, had boomed, his booming laughter echoing through the small meeting room. Thorne was a man whose wealth was matched only by his booming voice and his reputation for raising two sons who were as wild and untamed as the mustangs that roamed his vast Bar T ranch. "They ain't seen the inside of a schoolhouse regular since their mama passed," Thorne had continued, a hint of sadness momentarily softening his gruff features. "They're spirited." Eleanor had met his gaze steadily, her initial apprehension giving way to a quiet confidence. "I believe I am capable, Mr. Thorne. Every child deserves an education, regardless of their spirit." Thorne had simply chuckled again, a sound that implied he knew something she didn't. "We shall see, Miss Ainsworth. We shall see." The first few weeks of school proved to be more challenging than Eleanor had anticipated. The students, a mix of farm children and ranch hands' offspring, were a lively bunch, their education ranging from rudimentary reading to a complete lack thereof. But it was the Thorne boys, 15-year-old Caleb and 13-year-old Ethan, who lived up to their father's description of spirited. Caleb, the elder, was a tall, lanky boy with a rebellious streak as wide as the valley. He was quick-witted but prone to disruptive behavior, his boredom manifesting in whispered jokes, expertly aimed spitballs, and a general air of disdain for anything resembling learning. Ethan, smaller but equally mischievous, was Caleb's shadow, eagerly participating in his brother's antics and adding his own brand of youthful chaos to the classroom. They openly scoffed at Eleanor's fancy Eastern ways, her insistence on proper grammar and her attempts to introduce them to poetry. They played pranks, hid her chalk, and on one memorable occasion, released a box full of grasshoppers during her lesson on the American Revolution. The other students, initially amused by the Thorne boys' antics, soon grew weary of the constant disruptions. Eleanor found herself spending more time trying to maintain order than actually teaching. Her voice, though firm, often felt lost in the sea of their youthful rebellion. She tried various methods. She assigned extra work, kept them after school, even attempted to reason with them. But Caleb and Ethan seemed impervious to traditional discipline, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of defiance and amusement. Word of the chaos in the schoolhouse reached Jedediah Thorne at the Bar T ranch. He would occasionally ride into town, his booming laughter echoing through the streets as he inquired about the new schoolteacher and her progress with his boys. The townsfolk, sympathetic to Eleanor's struggles, would offer her encouraging words, but Thorne's amusement was palpable. "Still trying to tame those wildcats, Miss Ainsworth?" he'd bellow, tipping his hat with a mockingly polite gesture. "They ain't broken easy, those two." Eleanor would offer a tight smile, her determination undeterred, at least outwardly. Inwardly, however, she was beginning to feel the strain. She had come to Harmony Creek with such high hopes, but the Thorne boys seemed determined to thwart her at every turn. One particularly frustrating afternoon, after Caleb had tied Ethan to his chair with rope pilfered from the stable and Ethan had responded by feigning a dramatic swoon, Eleanor found herself on the verge of tears. She dismissed the other students and kept the Thorne boys behind. "Caleb, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "your behavior is unacceptable. You are disrupting the learning of the other students, and you are showing a profound disrespect for this school and for me." Caleb smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Ain't much to respect, Miss Fancy Pants." Ethan snickered. Eleanor took a deep breath, fighting back her frustration. She realized that traditional methods weren't going to work with these boys. She needed to find a different approach, something that would reach them beneath their rebellious exteriors. She thought about what little she had learned about them. Their mother had died when they were young, leaving them to be raised by their gruff but perhaps neglectful father and the rough ranch hands. They were strong, resourceful, and fiercely independent, qualities that, if channeled correctly, could be assets rather than liabilities. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the schoolhouse with a different kind of lesson plan. Instead of reading from textbooks, she brought in a map of the Arizona territory. "Today," she announced, her voice filled with a newfound enthusiasm, "we are going to learn about the land around us. The mountains, the rivers, the history of this territory." Caleb and Ethan exchanged skeptical glances, but even they seemed intrigued by the large, colorful map. Eleanor spoke of the early settlers, the Native American tribes, the challenges of ranching and mining. She told stories of bravery and resilience, of survival in a harsh environment. For the first time, the Thorn boys seemed to pay attention. They knew this land. They had ridden across it, worked on it. Eleanor's words, though spoken in her refined Eastern accent, resonated with their own experiences. Over the following weeks, Eleanor continued to incorporate practical lessons into her curriculum. She taught them basic surveying, using the schoolyard as their training ground. She introduced them to the principles of mechanics, using examples from the local blacksmith's trade. She even organized nature walks, pointing out the different plants and animals of the valley. Slowly, something began to shift. Caleb and Ethan still had their moments of mischief, but their disruptive behavior lessened. They started asking questions, their curiosity piqued by these new, more tangible subjects. They even began to show a grudging respect for Eleanor, recognizing that she wasn't just some fancy Easterner, but someone who was genuinely trying to teach them something of value. Jedediah Thorn, riding into town one Saturday, was surprised to hear a different kind of report from the townsfolk. They spoke of the Thorn boys showing up to school regularly, even seeming interested. He rode out to the schoolhouse one afternoon, his curiosity piqued. He found Eleanor outside with the students, who were engaged in building a miniature dam in the creek that ran behind the schoolyard, applying the principles of water flow they had learned in class. Caleb and Ethan were working side by side, their usual bickering replaced by focused collaboration. Thorn watched them for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. He approached Eleanor, who was observing the students with a quiet satisfaction. "Miss Ainsworth," Thorn said, his booming voice softer than usual, "what in tarnation have you done to my boys?" Eleanor turned to him, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "I simply showed them that learning can be relevant, Mr. Thorn." Thorn chuckled, a warm, genuine sound this time. "Well, I'll be. Looks like you've got away with those wildcats after all, Miss Ainsworth. A way I never could find." He looked at his sons, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Maybe there's more to those fancy Eastern ways than I thought." Eleanor smiled. The laughter of the Thorn boys, no longer disruptive but filled with the joy of discovery, echoed through the valley. It seemed the new schoolteacher had indeed begun to tame the wild hearts of Harmony Creek, starting with the sons of the rancher who had once laughed at her. The change in Caleb and Ethan Thorn's behavior didn't go unnoticed in Harmony Creek. The townsfolk, long accustomed to their mischievous antics and general disruption, watched with a mixture of surprise and approval as the brothers began attending school regularly and even showed a flicker of interest in their lessons. Whispers of wonder and praise followed Miss Ainsworth, whose quiet persistence seemed to be working miracles. Jedediah Thorn, while pleased by the transformation in his sons, initially regarded it with a healthy dose of suspicion. He was used to his boys being wild cards, and this sudden shift felt too good to be true. He'd occasionally ride into town, his booming laughter echoing through the streets as he inquired about the new schoolteacher and her progress with his boys, a hint of amusement still lacing his tone. He'd observed the schoolhouse from a distance, watching as Miss Ainsworth enthusiastically explained the constellations using homemade models and simple language that seemed to captivate even the most restless students. He'd see her teaching them to draw the landscapes of the valley, encouraging them to express their own unique perspectives. And he'd witness Caleb, who usually shunned books, reading aloud from adventure novels with surprising engagement, while Ethan proudly displayed his improving arithmetic skills. One afternoon, Thorne found Miss Ainsworth after school, helping Caleb repair a broken wagon wheel, using simple tools and explaining the principles of leverage. Caleb listened intently, his usual smirk replaced by a focused concentration. Thorne approached, clearing his throat. Miss Ainsworth and Caleb turned. "Miss Ainsworth," Thorne said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Seems my boys are spending more time here than on the ranch these days." Eleanor smiled. "They are capable students, Mr. Thorne. They simply needed to find subjects that engaged them." Caleb, usually defiant in his father's presence, shuffled his feet and mumbled, "School ain't so bad, sometimes." Thorne looked at his son, then back at Miss Ainsworth, a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes. "Seems you've got a way with them, Miss Ainsworth. A way I never could find in all their years." Eleanor's smile widened. "They are intelligent boys, Mr. Thorne. They just needed a different approach." She paused, then added thoughtfully, "Sometimes, the wildest horses just need a gentle hand and a clear direction." Thorne chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that resonated through the quiet schoolyard. "Well, Miss Ainsworth, it seems you've got a steadier hand than I ever did with those two. I reckon I owe you an apology for my initial skepticism." Eleanor inclined her head gracefully. "No apology necessary, Mr. Thorne. My goal is simply to help all the children of Harmony Creek reach their full potential." Over the following months, the transformation in Caleb and Ethan became even more pronounced. They started taking their studies seriously, even initiating their own learning outside of the classroom, poring over books by the fire at night and discussing the lessons they had learned. Their respect for Eleanor grew into a quiet admiration, and they even began to defend her against any lingering skepticism from their peers. Their newfound interest in learning also began to positively influence their behavior outside of school. They became more responsible on the ranch, their youthful energy channeled into productive tasks rather than reckless pranks. They even started to show a more considerate side, helping the younger ranch hands and treating the animals with greater care. The other children in the school, witnessing the Thorne boys' transformation, also seemed to become more engaged in their studies. The classroom atmosphere shifted from one of reluctant obedience to one of genuine curiosity and a shared pursuit of knowledge. Eleanor's initial idealism was slowly but surely taking root in the fertile ground of young minds. Jedediah Thorne, witnessing these changes firsthand, developed a deep respect for the quiet schoolteacher who had managed to tame his wild sons. He would often stop by the schoolhouse, not to scoff, but to inquire about the boys' progress and to offer Eleanor any assistance she might need. He even donated some lumber to repair the dilapidated roof of the schoolhouse, a tangible sign of his newfound appreciation. One crisp autumn evening, Thorne invited Eleanor to dinner at the Bar T Ranch. It was an informal affair, just the three of them around the large wooden table in the ranch house kitchen. Thorne, usually a man of few words at the dinner table, found himself engaging Eleanor in conversation, discussing everything from the challenges of ranching to the beauty of the Arizona landscape. Caleb and Ethan, surprisingly well-behaved, listened attentively, occasionally interjecting with newfound knowledge they had gleaned from their lessons. Eleanor, initially nervous, found herself relaxing in their company, her heart warmed by the genuine change she had witnessed. As the evening drew to a close, Thorne walked Eleanor to her horse. The stars blazed in the clear desert sky, and a comfortable silence settled between them. "Miss Ainsworth," Thorne said, his voice gruff but sincere, "you've done something remarkable here. Not just with my boys, but with the whole town. You've shown us that there's more to life than just hard work and survival. You've brought light, I reckon." Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. "The children of Harmony Creek are bright, Mr. Thorne. They simply needed the opportunity to shine. Thorn chuckled softly. Well, you certainly gave them that. And you tamed my wildcats in the bargain. Something I never thought I'd see. He paused, then added, his voice a little rough around the edges, Thank you, Miss Ainsworth. For everything. Eleanor simply smiled again, the vast, starlit sky seeming to reflect the quiet triumph in her heart. The rancher who had once laughed at the new schoolteacher now stood before her, humbled and grateful. And in the small, remote town of Harmony Creek, the power of education and a gentle, persistent spirit had indeed tamed even the wildest of hearts.